Well, to sum up, because the last slide was an awfully long one, the themes in Walden: radical self-reliance. He doesn't like institutions at all. At one point, he even calls them dirty institutions. Keep your dirty institutions and their hands off of me. He's a real disdain for anybody who wants him to join some sort of club or group or whatnot. By the way, he got an invitation to join the Brook Farm Commune. Margaret Fuller, Hawthorne, Ripley, all these guys of the Romantic movement here in America, many of them anyway, joined the Brook Farm community. It was a bust. But Emerson basically, I'm sorry, Thoreau basically got the invitation and said, no thank you, I'll live by myself. When they asked him why, he said, I'd rather have a private room in hell than share a room in heaven. Thank you very much. I'll go it alone, no matter how miserable I am, because I don't really want to share happiness. There ain't no such thing. He gets the reputation of being a hermit and a misanthrope. I think it's kind of unfair. He had a lot of friends. He had several friends, but he was a very aloof kind of guy. And part of this was because he really wanted to be a very self-reliant person, and he means that on many different levels. Self-reliant in terms of the unity of labor, as we were talking about. Self-reliant in terms of I don't want to be dependent upon society. Self-reliant in terms of I want to promote, the kinds of living that I want to engage in, not what society tells me. He's, again, establishing a balance between the material and the spiritual. We saw that in the higher laws section and in other areas there. He wants to establish a balance. Too much material, and we lose the fact that we are spiritual creatures, that we're here for a reason. We're not here to buy sea-doos. We're here because of some other higher purpose. We've got to go figure out what that is. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. I can't tell you that. You can't learn it and follow somebody else. You have to know it yourself. But we can't live completely spiritually. We can't live completely materially. He's looking for some intersection or balance between the two. And he says if there's one side of the scale that's more heavily weighed in modern existence, it's the material, folks. So then he's also wanting to look at the world differently than through the received methods. I don't want to take just what my daddy and my grandpa told me is true as gospel. I need to go out and find out for myself. And I don't want to just do what everybody else tells me that this is the way you do it because it's the way we've always done it. I'm not going to vote a certain way or think a certain way or go to a certain particular church because that's the way I was brought up. I'm going to go find out for myself what is the best way to do a thing. What's the best way to pursue something. The concept of redemption. This whole experience was a redemption experience for him. He comes out of the woods a different human being than when he went in. And he talks extensively about redemption and how important it is to our lives. And that this can only happen, redemption can only happen through experience. It can't happen secondhand. You don't get redeemed in whatever sense you may mean that word. You don't get it redeemed by reading about redemption or by listening to someone talk about redemption. You don't have some sort of experiential redemption in your life where you turn around and become a new person, become a bigger, a better person, a more enlightened person, whatever that means to you. There's no way you get that secondhand. It's a thing you must do yourself. And so this is a huge point about in Walden. Do you want an example of what Emerson was talking about with respect to nature being a conduit to spiritual truths? Thoreau gives it to you throughout this book because he lives it every day. Here's one on 291 that's really worth kind of taking a moment and peeking at here, because he says right here, what I have observed of the pond is no less true in ethics. It is the law of average. Such a rule of the two diameters not only guides us toward the sun and the system and the heart in man, but draws lines through the length and breadth of the aggregate of a man's particular daily behaviors and waves of life into his coves and inlets, and where they intersect will be the height or depth of his character. He learned that by looking at a pond? Yeah, but it wasn't the pond that gave it to him. It was the spirit in him, the soul in him, looking at the pond that brought about a response in him that was more than just what the pond had to offer in the way of water molecules. This is what they're talking about in contemplating nature. Really, in contemplating nature, you're contemplating yourself and you're contemplating God. Okay, his conclusions that I think are very interesting in that final chapter that are worth kind of going over, partly because they're quite quotable. A lot of quotable lines in this piece. I mean, it's quoted right and left all over the place because he's got such pithy, wonderful things. And part of that is because much of this was gleaned from his daily journals. He would write in his journal every day, and then every time he wrote something he thought was particularly good or profound, he made a point to include it in some section of Walden, some chapter. So really, this is the product, the amalgam of the greatest hits, if you will, of his journal writing at the time that he was out there, and a little bit of time afterwards as well. And so every time he wrote a wonderful one-liner, it found its way into Walden. When he wrote it in his journal, it found its way into Walden. On page 323, he says, "I learned this, at least, by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him, or the old laws be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." Castles in the air, right? These utopias that people create, these master plans of reforming society. That's fine. That's fine. I don't follow that kind of stuff. If you like to do that, if you like to dream up these wonderful schemes, that's fine. But you got to put the foundations underneath these castles that you've built in the air. They really belong in the air, frankly, up in the sky, because they don't exist down here on planet Earth. Another wonderful line on page 328 that he goes into is, "Love your life, poor as it is. You may perhaps find some pleasant, thrilling, glorious hours, even in a poorhouse. Love your life," he says. There's no time to bitch and moan about it. You don't get that much. Go out and live it, and don't squander it. We squander our lives too much. He says on page 329, he says, "Money is not required to buy one necessary of the soul." There's not one spiritual necessity that can be bought with money. You don't need money for that. Now, you say, "Well, but if I don't pursue money, I'm going to be poor." Right, poor materially, but not necessarily poor spiritually. And you can love your life even if you don't have much stuff, because it doesn't take stuff to love life. And then finally on page 333, as he closes it out, he says, "I do not say that John or Jonathan will realize all this, everything I have to teach. I'm not going to tell you that the average Joe Sixpack out there is going to get my book. I don't know whether they will or not. All I care about is whether you do. But such is the character of that morrow which mere lapse of time can never make to dawn. The light which puts out our eyes is darkness to us. Only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star." In other words, not everybody's going to get what I'm saying. They're going to have to go get it on their own because they're going to have to live it on their own. But if what I did was inspire you to go out and do it, that's great. "Oh, but Henry, not everybody will do this kind of thing." Oh, I know. But I have faith that human beings will seek the higher good. It's what we were put on earth to do anyway. And it may take a lot of people a lot longer to go find that than it took me. But that doesn't mean that people can't find it on their own eventually, because they will. It's a wonderful text. There's so much more in here that we can't cover because we have limitations here, but I hope you find some wonderful things in here. We'll pick up with the discussion on it. I'm going to add a few things about civil disobedience here with the remaining slides, and then we'll wrap up.